A bobcat, even if you once raised it from the moment it was soaked in a snowstorm and released it back into the deep forest, will never return. But if one night you hear a soft knock on your window during a snowfall and see a gray silhouette waiting, no calling sound, just a gaze, would you be brave enough to believe that love, once planted with trust and freedom, will always find its way back? This story begins with a tiny life left behind, but it ends with a parting gift from the wild, laid upon the stone grave of an old dog, like a promise that was never broken. Do you believe that a bobcat say goodbye? If not, let us tell you the story. It was a late afternoon at the end of March in a quiet countryside near Sebago Lake. The fading sunlight stretched its final golden rays across a winding dirt road weaving through snow-laced woods. Thomas Blake's old pickup truck rumbled steadily, carrying the weary middle-aged man home after a long day at a rural veterinary clinic. The late winter wind was dry and biting, sweeping through bare birch trunks and curling around his collar like a reminder. Winter wasn't ready to let go. All Thomas longed for was to sit down with a cup of hot tea, hear his wife Lily chatting in the kitchen, and feel his 11-year-old daughter, Hazel, who preferred hugging cats over playing on her phone, rest her head on his shoulder, rambling about a bird's nest she just spotted outside. But then, at a curve near the forest's edge, just about 2 miles from home, a small gray shape appeared by the roadside. Most people would have driven past, thinking it was just a patch of dirty snow or a fallen branch from last week's storm. But to Thomas, whose eyes had grown used to catching every sign of life or death in small creatures, that shape radiated something different. He stopped the car. Cold wind rushed in as the door opened. On the damp gravel, a female bobcat lay motionless, body stiff, fur streaked with dried blood. Clearly hit by a car. But what made Thomas's chest tighten was the faint sound coming from the brush nearby, a fragile cry so soft it could have been mistaken for wind. He stepped slowly toward it, and then he saw a tiny creature, trembling, eyes barely open, its fur mottled with patchy markings curled up like a cinder. A baby bobcat, not even 2 weeks old. It was barely breathing, its damp nose quivering slightly, a fragile body not yet aware that the world had just taken its mother. "Well, little one," Thomas whispered, kneeling down, his hands cold and trembling, but still as gentle as they had been when rescuing kittens, fox cubs, or injured deer. The baby was nearly gone, eyes dry, skin dehydrated, starved for days, and now, amid the remnants of a lingering winter, the chances of survival were slim. Thomas knew that. He also knew he shouldn't bring a wild bobcat home without a permit, but his heart, one that had seen too many births and goodbyes, couldn't wait. Gently, he wrapped the creature in an old scarf, pressing it to his chest like the last warm ember of its mother. "Let's go home, little one. I can't promise anything, but I'll do my best," he murmured, casting one last glance at the mother. Then he drove away, carrying not only a fading life, but the beginning of a story no one could have foreseen. Thomas promised to call the forestry department once he got home. He bowed his head beside the mother's body and whispered a vow. "I swear I won't let your child die cold out here." The kitchen in the Blake household still carried the scent of leftover apple pie from lunch when the door burst open. The wind brought with it the chill of snow and Thomas's hurried footsteps, bundled in his old coat, holding a small creature gasping for breath. Lily turned from the sink, her expression first flickering with surprise, then shifting to shock, nearly anger. "Thomas Blake, have you lost your mind?" Her voice was sharp as wind slicing through cracked glass. "That's a bobcat kitten, a bobcat. We can't just keep it in the kitchen like some stray tabby." Thomas didn't reply immediately. He was kneeling by the table, unwrapping the scarf to reveal the whimpering creature on a soft towel. It was so thin its ribs jutted out, skin cracked from dryness, eyes tightly shut as if they had never seen light. "I know," Thomas replied softly, pouring warm milk from a thermos into a syringe. "But the rescue center's overloaded. They're swamped with 3 bear cubs from the wildfire last month. This little one won't make it through the night if we send it there now." Hazel, clutching a book by the fireplace, had crept closer at some point. She stared at the curled-up creature, as if afraid that even her breath might make it vanish. Will it die, Daddy?" Thomas looked up, his eyes, seasoned by hundreds of emergency cases, suddenly glassy. "Not if I can help it." Lily folded her arms, but the tension in her face had softened. 20 years with a vet meant their house was never without some creature in need, from sparrows with broken wings to snakes with scraped scales. But this was a bobcat, and it would grow. "Have you called anyone?" "I did. Elias from the forestry department will be here by morning with a temporary legal hold. If the little guy survives, we'll find a way to return him to the wild." Hazel tilted her head, then suddenly asked, "What's his name?" Lily was about to object, but Hazel had already stepped closer, her hand nearly brushing the dappled fur. "We can't just call him that thing. He needs a name to live." Thomas smiled. "Rowan." "Why Rowan?" "Because he'll need all the strength he can get, and the rowan tree is the first to bud before the snow is even melted. Just like him." "Rowan," Hazel whispered, then leaned down and murmured into the creature's ear, "You're going to live, okay?" As if he heard her, the baby bobcat let out a tiny rasp, just a faint wheeze, but enough to tighten the hearts of all 3 watching. Just then, Rusty, the family's old dog, walked in, quiet as a shadow. He stood beside the table, gazing at the small creature, his deep brown eyes like early spring ponds. No one dared move as Rusty stood on his hind legs, placing his front paws gently on the table's edge. He leaned down, sniffed, then suddenly licked the top of Rowan's head, as soft as wind brushing snow. Lily sighed, resigned. "Just temporary, Thomas. Very temporary." But none of them, not even Rusty, could have known that this moment would open a chapter too strange to be written with logic. A friendship beyond boundaries, a love that didn't require shared species. And from that moment on, the path ahead would no longer belong solely to humankind. The whole family was quickly swept into Rowan's journey for survival, not just as a mission, but as a miracle worth guarding. Hazel all but transformed his care into a sacred ritual. Every morning, she meticulously recorded every gram of weight gain, every sign of recovery in a notebook covered in hand-colored drawings. Bobcats running through snow, and even one sketch of Rusty licking a kitten's ear. But what surprised them most didn't come from Rowan. It came from Rusty. The golden dog, usually gentle and calm, seemed to have taken on a role no one assigned him, the silent guardian. Rusty never left the small wooden crate that Thomas had set up in the corner of the living room. Every time Rowan stirred, Rusty lifted his head. Whenever the little bobcat let out a soft hiss from hunger or cold, Rusty would nudge the blanket with his nose as if to say, "I'm here." And every time Rowan was brought out to stretch or eat, Rusty would lie nearby, ears perked, tail gently wagging with each wobbly, yet steadily improving step of the tiny creature. One evening, when Rowan took his first clumsy steps across the rug, Thomas and Lily stood leaning in the doorway, eyes fixed on him. Rusty gently nudged Rowan's back with his nose as if to say, "Keep going, I'm right behind you." Lily whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you see? He's not just caring for him. He's teaching him how to live." By the end of December, as snow began to fall thick outside the porch, Rowan was strong enough to explore other rooms in the house. But that was also when Thomas and Lily began to worry. Rowan was no longer the dying creature wrapped in a scarf. He was growing fast and growing too close to humans. "He's imprinting on us," Thomas said to Elias, his friend from the forestry department, during one of his visits. "Not just on humans," Elias replied, glancing at Rusty, who lay on the floor with Rowan resting his head on the dog's belly. "He's already imprinted on that dog's heart. At this rate, releasing him would be like tossing a child into traffic." They debated for a long time. Keeping a fully grown bobcat in a household was impossible, but letting him go, as if nothing had happened between them, didn't feel right either. It was Lily who spoke up first. "We don't have to choose one or the other. Our house borders the forest. It's big enough to create a transition space. We can give him freedom without abandoning him." Elias nodded slowly. "A soft release. If anyone can do it, it's you too." And so began a new chapter in Rowan's journey. Thomas built a large enclosure behind the house, opening into the woods, complete with shelter, climbing structures, and a large log to train on. They set up feeding stations, moving them further from the house week by week. Hazel continued drawing in her journal, this time sketching pine branches, footprints in the snow, and a bobcat raising its head to sniff the wind. By the next spring, Rowan had grown into a strong adolescent. His silvery fur darkened, his eyes clear and sharp, and his gait no longer unsteady. But the one thing that hadn't changed was his bond with Rusty. Every evening, the family took Rusty for a walk along the 5-mile dirt path around the woods. Rowan, though now living outside the enclosure, always appeared from somewhere in the underbrush, walking side by side with Rusty like a flexible shadow. They didn't speak, but they understood each other in silence. One April afternoon, Hazel suddenly stopped in a patch of wild grass, watching the two animals moving ahead. Rowan crouched low to the ground. Instantly, Rusty stood still, eyes scanning the distance. "Dad, do you see that?" Hazel called softly. "They have their own code. It's like Rusty knows exactly when to pause, when to let Rowan practice hunting." Thomas didn't answer, just smiled. In the slanting light through the young forest, he realized, some things don't need explaining. Witnessing them is enough to believe. True friendship doesn't require shared species, only a shared rhythm of trust. Thomas stood silently under the eaves, the November wind tugging gently at his coat. In the pale gray sky, clouds drifted slowly as if hesitating. Rowan sat at the edge of the forest, his posture solid and calm like a mist-covered stone statue, eyes fixed on the old house that had once been his first home. Rusty, now 8 years old, was no longer as agile as before, but his aging legs still bounded across the lawn as if time had never touched him. The golden dog slid slightly on the damp leaves, then stopped right before Rowan, bowing his head in that familiar, reverent gesture. In response, Rowan stretched out a paw and gently batted Rusty's ear, affectionate, as though no time had passed between them. From the porch, Hazel and Lily had joined Thomas. The girl, now nearly as tall as her mother, had her hair tied neatly at the nape, eyes fixed on the scene ahead as if watching an old dream return. "Do you see it?" Lily whispered. "No matter where he goes, he still chooses to come back." Hazel nodded softly. "But today feels different." Indeed, Rowan hadn't just come to visit. He stood up, took a few steps toward the forest, then turned to look back at Rusty. He walked on again and looked back once more. "Dad, I think he's calling," Hazel whispered, her chest tightening with a vague sense of foreboding. Thomas was silent. For 3 years, they had learned not to interfere with Rowan's freedom. But today, there was something urgent, something new in his gait. "I don't think this is safe," Lily said, anxious. "He's still a wild animal. We don't know where he's taking Rusty." "Look at Rusty, Mom," Hazel whispered. "He wants to go. He understands." Rusty waited, turning to look at his family one last time. Those eyes, though dulled by age, still gleamed with gentle certainty. His tail wagged softly, as if to reassure them. "Letting go is part of loving," Thomas sighed, reaching for his familiar vet kit. "We'll follow them, but from a distance." The Blake family quietly followed the two figures disappearing into the fading forest light. They crossed paths they had never taken before, slipping between ancient pines where the ground was thick with moss and fallen leaves. Rowan led the way, pausing now and then to glance back, guiding them not just by instinct, but by quiet trust. After more than 20 minutes, he brought them to a shallow hollow at the base of a rise, where a fallen tree formed a natural shelter. The scent of damp wood and moss lingered in the breeze. And then they saw 3 small creatures, fur still fluffy and speckled like petals scattered by the wind, lay curled beneath the trunk. 3 bobcat cubs, not yet a month old, hovering between the edge of life and wilderness. Hazel held her breath. Lily raised a hand to her mouth. Thomas dropped to his knees, slowly observing. There was no sign of their mother. Only Rowan, standing guard behind them, his eyes glowing with an eerie light in the old forest shadows. Rusty stepped forward. No one needed to give him permission. The old dog lowered his head gently, then lay down, stretching out his body as if to shield them. One of the small cubs stirred, nudging into his dark gold fur. Then another, and the third. Rowan didn't react. Instead, he stepped forward, touching each cub's back with his nose, then turned, gently licking Rusty's ear. "Oh my God," Lily whispered, her voice cracking. He's entrusting his children to Rusty. He's not just asking for help." Thomas shook his head, his gaze filled with reverence. "He's choosing family." In that moment, among the cold roots and the whispering breath of early winter, they understood. Rowan was no longer just the creature they had once rescued. He was an inseparable part of the Blake family. And now, he was placing the deepest trust of his life in the only friend he had ever truly known, a golden dog named Rusty. Rowan had led them beyond places they had ever dared to tread, farther than any familiar trail, into a forest so dense that even light had to twist and crawl to slip through. Wind whistled through the brittle pine branches, carrying the scent of something still unnamed. "He's not wandering," Thomas whispered, eyes fixed on the bobcat's retreating shape. "He's leading us. Somewhere." Every few minutes, Rowan would stop and glance back, as if to make sure Rusty was still following and that the family hadn't fallen behind. After nearly half an hour of weaving through thick layers of fallen leaves and tangled roots, Rowan came to a stop in a shallow hollow, shielded by a fallen log and shoulder-high shrubs. He slipped through a narrow gap beneath the decaying wood, and Rusty, without hesitation, followed as if he had known the way all along. Thomas raised a hand to signal a halt. "Easy," he whispered. "Let's not startle them." As they crouched and drew closer, a sight unfolded that took their breath away. 3 tiny bobcat cubs, fluffy as spring weeds, their gray-blue eyes wide with primal wariness, lay curled inside a nest made of moss, dry leaves, and animal fur. They stirred at the scent of humans, but did not flee. Rowan stood in front of the nest, not growling, not snarling, just watching. His gaze held no threat, only an invitation born of trust. "Oh my God," Lily whispered, clutching her chest. "He's their father." Hazel couldn't hold back. She stepped forward, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Rusty sat beside the nest, breathing softly. Then, as if understanding what was needed, he lay down on his side, his body stretched out like a shield around the tiny ones. Rowan didn't stop him. Instead, he gently approached, nose lowered, nudging each of his children toward Rusty. 1, 2, 3. Each step, each placement is like a sacred ritual. Rusty leaned in, licking each cub on the head, just as he had once done to Rowan. Slow, tender, not a single beat out of place. "He's introducing them," Hazel whispered, as if afraid to break the moment. "Not just introducing," Thomas said, his voice tight. "He's entrusting them." "But if their mother's gone..." Lily bit her lip. "Do you think something happened to her?" Thomas nodded, eyes never leaving Rowan. "I'm afraid so, and now he has only one place to turn to." Rowan didn't leave. He lay down beside Rusty, pressing his body into the old golden dog, as if the two worlds, after years of entanglement, had finally become one. That day, the Blake family didn't just witness a miracle. They became a part of it. The weeks that followed were an emotional trial. Thomas confirmed his suspicions. The cub's mother was gone. With Elias's support and an emergency wildlife permit, the family set up a disguised feeding station near the nest, added a shelter, and checked the cub's health daily. They kept a careful distance, close enough to protect, but never to intrude. Rusty accompanied every visit. He wasn't just a gatekeeper. He played with the cubs, taught them how to pounce on grass, avoid thorns, and listen to the sounds of owls in the night. One snowy afternoon, Hazel told her father, "I think Rusty's teaching them how to be wild animals, but with the heart of a friend." News of the extraordinary friendship spread fast. Biologists came to see it. Among them was Dr. Lenora Harper, a wild feline expert from the University of Maine. After hours of observation, she said only one thing: "I can't explain this with science, but with my heart, I understand." Then winter truly arrived. Snow blanketed the ancient forest, and in that deep, white silence, there lived a family unlike any definition ever known. A bobcat who had lost his mate, seeking out an old dog. A man who once rescued a fragile life now supports a whole generation of wild ones. And within the bitter cold of the land, something warm crept into their hearts. Trust, the kind that exists only between souls of different kinds, yet beating with the same heart. By January, the bobcat cubs were no longer the shivering lives huddled in moss. Under the care of two guardians, one wild father, one gentle golden retriever, they began to step outside, exploring the white world beyond their nest. Rowan taught them how to track scents, how to move silently through snow. Rusty always stood at a distance, watching, never interfering, just guarding, as if, should any gust of wind try to harm the little ones, he would be the first wall to break it. One quiet, snowy afternoon, Hazel begged, "Mom, Dad, I want to set up a camera. I want to see what happens when we're not there." "For your school project?" Lily asked, smiling. "Number for my heart," Hazel replied, her voice soft but firm. "I want to know what that friendship looks like when no one's watching." A week later, when they played back the first footage, all three were silent. On the wind-shaken screen was a moment that made them stop breathing. Rusty was chasing falling snow, running around a bush, turning back, giving a playful bark, and Rowan, the grown bobcat, was chasing after him, not to hunt, to play. The next scene showed a coyote wandering near the nest. Rowan crouched, moving low to the ground. Rusty, from the opposite side, stepped out from the pine thicket, a low growl in his throat. Together, they flanked the intruder, forced it away, then quietly returned the three cubs to the nest. Calmly, without a single hiss. Lily covered her mouth. Hazel burst into tears. "They're not just friends," Thomas said quietly. "They're co-parents." That spring came early, and with it, a quiet goodbye. Rowan began taking the cubs farther away. Gradually, the food at the station remained untouched. The check-ins grew sparse, and one morning, the mossy nest lay still, covered in fresh wildflower petals. They were gone. Hazel sat silently on the steps, staring at the now green forest. "We won't see them again, will we, Dad?" Thomas draped an arm around her shoulders. "Maybe not. But you know what?" He pointed toward the now empty feeding station. "We didn't hold them back with love. We love them enough to let them go." From that day on, Rusty no longer tugged at the leash during walks near the woods, but sometimes he'd stand still at the edge of the lawn, gazing into that clearing, as if waiting for a silver silhouette to return. 2 years passed. Rusty was now 10. The fur around his muzzle had turned white. His hind legs trembled with arthritis. The days of running through snow were only memories. Thomas began giving him medication each morning, gently massaging his knees like a silent ritual between man and old friend. Rowan still appeared, not often, but always at the right moments. A quiet figure in the tree line, a knock at dawn, and always for Rusty. On the first snowfall of November, Hazel returned home from university, now a freshman studying wildlife biology. She had just hung up her coat when she heard Rusty whining by the kitchen door. As soon as it opened, he stepped outside, leaving aged paw prints in the new snow. "What is it, old man?" Hazel called softly. Following, "Where are you going in this cold?" Rusty didn't look back. He just walked forward, toward the lawn's edge, where the forest began to swallow the light. Hazel stopped when she saw him standing still, body tense, ears pointed toward a blurred shape in the snow-laced wind. She squinted. One silhouette, then two. Rowan emerged from the forest, walking with the calm, regal presence of a northern king. But what made Hazel catch her breath was the creature behind him. A grown bobcat, its coat still carrying youthful patterns, but its body strong and lean. Over its right eye were 2 round spots, exactly like the ones Thomas had noted 2 years ago. Hazel whispered, her lips trembling, "It's one of the 3. Rusty didn't bark. He didn't run. He simply sat there, waiting. Rowan stepped forward, nuzzled the neck of his old friend, then backed away, making room for his child. The young bobcat approached slowly, cautiously. It stopped just a few steps from Rusty, then bowed its head. A greeting. Hazel wiped her tears with her sweater sleeve, whispering, "He brought his child back to meet the one who raised him." In that silent moment, amid the first snowfall of the season, between old paw prints and new beginnings, love, wordless and pure, said everything. Through the thick flurry that cloaked the woods like smoke, a familiar silhouette slowly emerged, hazy, composed, as if stepping out from memory. "Dad," Hazel whispered, her voice catching. "It's Rowan." Thomas stepped out onto the porch, his hand gripping the railing. Rowan stood at the forest's edge, his golden coat stark against the ivory snow. But he wasn't alone. Just behind him stood a smaller, sturdier figure, a young bobcat, nearly grown, with 3 small spots above its right eye, exactly like the ones Thomas had recorded in his journal 2 years ago. Rowan stepped forward, slowly. Rusty, despite his age, rose from the rug by the fireplace. He walked to the door without being called, and like every time before, they met again as if no time had passed. Rowan nuzzled Rusty's neck, his claws retracted, his breath warming the graying fur, but this time, after the greeting, he stepped aside. The young bobcat came forward, cautious, hesitant, but as it neared and saw that Rusty didn't move, only gently wagged his tail, it stopped and bowed its head. "He remembers," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "He brought his child to meet an old friend." Hazel stood beside her parents, fists clenched, tears running down unnoticed. "It's not just remembering," she whispered. "This is how he says, 'Thank you.'" In the winters that followed, Rowan continued to return, sometimes alone, sometimes with descendants, fleeting shadows among mist-laced branches, golden eyes flickering briefly before vanishing like smoke. Rusty, at 13, grew frail. His bones no longer allowed for long walks, but each time Rowan returned, his eyes sparkled like they did in his youth. And on a still winter morning when the world seemed not yet awake, Thomas walked into the living room and saw Rowan sitting silently by the window, his gaze asking, "May I come in?" Thomas opened the door. Rowan stepped inside, quiet as dusk. He didn't sniff for food. He didn't wander. He went straight to Rusty, who lay dozing and lay down beside him, his head resting gently against the dog's neck, without a single sound. Two beings that never should have belonged to each other now lay together as if they had always been that way. Rusty passed away in his sleep on a foggy morning in February. No barking, no whimpering. He simply didn't wake up. The Blake family buried him on the hill behind the house, overlooking the forest where Rowan had first appeared. They placed a small, simple stone marker. Rusty, the first friend. During the farewell, as the wind stirred through the dry branches, Thomas looked up, and there, at the forest's edge, stood a bobcat, motionless as a statue. No one else saw him, but Thomas knew. A week later, Hazel found a snowshoe hare, still warm, placed beneath the gravestone. Beside it, large bobcat tracks pressed deep into the fresh snow. She wrapped her arms around the stone, whispering, "Goodbye, Rowan. Thank you for your final word." Years passed, and the Blake family continued living in their little home by Sebago Lake. They raised a young golden retriever named Scout, playful, wide-eyed, as bright as morning sun. Hazel grew up to become a wildlife researcher, and whenever she was asked about the first chapter that made you fall in love with nature, the name Rowan always came first. Thomas still opened the door whenever the wind knocked gently against the glass. Because sometimes, when night falls and the snow begins to drift, there's a gray shadow lingering at the forest's edge, pausing, watching, as if still guarding his family. The world turns on. Winter always gives way to summer, the last snowflake melts into the soil, and old forest paths are covered in young leaves and birdsong. But some things don't fade with time. A name whispered in dreams, a paw print fading in snow. A bobcat was once rescued, which came back to rescue the human heart in return. Rowan had taught them with silent gentleness, with a gaze that needed no words, that love doesn't require likeness to exist, and the boundary between belonging and freedom is sometimes nothing more than a door left ajar. And even now, whenever snow begins to fall over the town of Sebago, people still say, if you stand quietly by your window on a cold, moonlit night, turn off all the lights and listen very closely, you might just hear footsteps, light as breath. A bobcat is returning. Not because he's lost, but because he still remembers the way home.